I'd like to go straight to our first speaker, who is Dr. Michelle Ward from Griffith University. Michelle's a researcher in conservation and policy, focusing on developing practical, evidence-based solutions for biodiversity conservation and environmental sustainability. Most recently and relevantly, Michelle's a leading researcher on New South Wales land clearing rates, including the drivers and impacts on biodiversity. Welcome, Michelle. Over to you.
Thanks very much for that, Brad. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Ward, and I am a research scientist at Griffith University. I'm also a lead scientist for the Griffith Institute for Human and Environmental Resilience. And so today I'm going to be talking about a new paper called Vegetation Clearing Continues to Erode Biodiversity Values Across New South Wales. So this is a statewide land clearing analysis, which looks at clearing over a 13-year period, so from 2010 to 2023, and looks at the impacts on threatened species, threatened ecological communities, and our river systems. So I probably am preaching to the choir here, but Australia is a mega biodiverse country. Because we've been an isolated continent for such a long time, we have this extraordinary ancient endemism. So 87 to 93% of Australia's mammals and flowering plants are found nowhere else on Earth. But coupled with that, we also are one of the worst nations for biodiversity decline. So in fact, Australia holds the record for the most number of mammal extinctions compared to any other country across the world. And the number one driver that's pushing species towards extinction is habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation. So we did an analysis in 2021, which we've just repeated to 2026, and we're seeing the same story. So habitat loss is driving the extinction for most species, including plants, inverts, fish, our reptiles, and is a close second behind invasive species and disease for frogs, birds, and mammals. So the aim of this study was to really dig into how much woody and non-woody vegetation was cleared from 2010 to 2023 and by what industry. Did the clearing rate change after the 2016 reforms? How much clearing was within threatened species habitats, threatened ecological communities, and riparian areas, so that vegetation next to rivers, and which legislation is authorising this clearing to occur. So a few of the speakers later on will really dig into the reforms and the legislation, but just for the knowledge for this project, there were major native vegetation reforms in 2016, which repealed the Native Vegetation Act and replaced it with the Biodiversity Conservation Act. So you'll see that I'll talk about the pre-reform period, which is this 2010 to 2014, the reform period from 2015 to 2017, and then the post-reform period, which is 2018 to 2023. So what we found was that from 2010 to 2023, almost 700,000 hectares of woody and non-woody vegetation was cleared. So this is an area larger than Sri Lanka. And it's important to note that this excluded vegetation lost due to natural events, such as, the 2019-2020 mega fires. We also excluded any clearing within plantation and forestry. And you can see in the map here, a very clear agricultural clearing going on in the brown, infrastructure in the grey, and then native forest logging in the green. We also broke down this analysis to annual vegetation clearing per hectare per year, and found that but in the pre-reform period, woody vegetation clearing was hovering around the 20,000 hectare mark, with a 161% increase during the reform period. That slowly tapered off in the post-reforms, but was still consistently around the 135% greater than in the pre-reforms. You can also see the different colours there. So consistently within, Queensland and globally, really, in the orange is agriculture, which is driving most of the vegetation clearing across New South Wales. This is then followed by infrastructure, and then followed again by native forest logging. We also intersected where the native vegetation, where the vegetation clearing was occurring, and found that more than 80% of the clearing was occurring on land used for native vegetation grazing. And interestingly, 40% of all clearing was within one ecological community, and that was the dry sclerophyll woodlands. So that's an example in the Cumberland dry sclerophyll forest at Bass Hill near Sydney. We then looked at what different biodiversity values were being impacted by this clearing and found that 15,000 hectares was cleared within the biodiversity values map. So this is a map developed by the New South Wales government, and it identifies land with high biodiversity value that is particularly sensitive to impacts from development and clearing. So you wouldn't expect much clearing to be going on in these really critical places, but we found 15,000 hectares has been lost. We also found that 80% of New South Wales threatened species had been impacted by the clearing or had clearing within their mapped ranges. So that resulted in about 693 different species being potentially impacted, including the critically endangered grassland earless dragon and the vulnerable red-lord whistler. 51 of New South Wales' 53 threatened ecological communities also experienced clearing within their ranges, and some experienced more than 14%. So this Warkworth Sands woodland lost 14%, and this is a threatened ecological community that only occurs in New South Wales, meaning that that's 14% of its global range. Oh, I've got one too many. Rivers are also not protected, so we found almost 34,000 hectares of riparian vegetation had been cleared between 2010 and 2023. Most, again, was for agriculture, so about 72%. And that's really concerning because rivers are so important for people, for our economy, for our biodiversity. The riparian zones offer bank stabilizations and buffer water temperature. They also filter runoff. So any sort of clearing can be really damaging to any sort of species downstream. And lastly, we also looked at what legislations are allowing land clearing. And so what we found was that the Native Vegetation Act had about 13% allocated to it. Same with the Local Land Services Act, about 13% or 54,000 hectares. About 5% was presumed allowable. So that category is defined as clearing for routine agricultural and land management activities that don't require any sort of Local Land Services Act approval. So things like clearing for fences or dams. One of the most interesting results that we found was that 66% of all clearing from 2018 to 2023 was unallocated. So unallocated clearing is defined by the New South Wales government as unable to identify a formal authorisation or was unable to presume clearing was authorised or allowable through some sort of visual interpretation of the imagery. So that's looking at using high resolution satellite imagery, for example. And so while this can be lawful, low level or unreported clearing, it could also be potentially unlawful or non-compliant within regulations. And so finally, we've identified in the paper four key reforms. So one, we obviously need to curb broad scale clearing by strengthening regulation and incentives, especially within those high priority biodiversity areas. Expand biodiversity mapping to cover places that are irreplaceable or cannot be offset. These are features that are currently missing from the biodiversity values map and will really need to align to the EPBC Act reforms. Assess cumulative impacts. So a lot of the time this clearing is assessed in isolated cases, but you really need to look at landscape scale cumulative risk assessments to be able to make good decisions and improve transparency. So we need to be able to close that reporting gap on clearing approvals, exemptions and outcomes. So that's all from me. And if you want to read that paper, please do take a picture of that barcode and it should take you to the paper. Thank you very much.